All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me today. I know you were called upon very last minute. And so I thought maybe just to start things off, I would just give a bit of context to how the three of us arrived in a Zoom conversation right now. I was originally scheduled to do a panel this weekend for the music conference on, I think the title was how to succeed as an artist post COVID-19. And I put together a panel of a bunch of managers and agents from the US and Canada. And, you know, with the events unfolding in the States this week, it started to feel like an ill-timed panel to have. And I felt from speaking with, you know, some of the people on my panel in the States that as Canadians, maybe some of us aren't realizing how intense things are in the States. And after having a lot of calls with them, I felt like I should get out of the way and make that panel space open to someone else. And I had a couple great calls with Tarun. He's been a long time friend and collaborator on lots of projects. And Tarun really encouraged me to think about it and see if I could still use this panel for something else. And that's kind of how we got here today. I asked Tarun, you know, if he would be comfortable talking to me about race in Canada, you know, about the current situation that we're in and that's unfolding. And if there was a friend that came to mind that we could call a big favor upon that would join us, just so that it wasn't just the two of us. And so, Herve, I thank you very much for joining us today too. So I thought I really want to have an intimate conversation with the three of us and not have this feel like a boring panel. And so just to break the mold from that right away, I'm going to turn it over to you guys first, and maybe Herve, you can start and just tell us a little bit about before I blabber more, just about who you are, where you are today, and just how you're feeling right now, and you know what thoughts you're having.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm based in Montreal. I'm part of this collective and a group of friends called Moonshine. Basically, it started like 5 years ago, where we decided to occupy the space that wasn't used in Montreal for like African electronic music, just because that's the music that we grew up listening to and our friends listening to, and we didn't get that in the city when we were going out. And yeah, some of our friends became DJ from there, studied on YouTube how to do it, because obviously there's like no criteria of a good or bad DJ for that scene. And it wasn't about being a good or bad DJ, but mostly just about like creating a space for, you know, for that scene to exist. And yeah, so it started as like every Saturday after the full moon, you need to text the phone number to get the address for the party. And it was actually my real phone number. And, you know, after after a couple of, you know, events, luckily it was only once a month, you know, and yeah, it came naturally, you know, it came from like us partying in one of my friends' kitchen to actually setting up those events for just friend of our friends, because that's still like what we really believe in. Just if you invite a friends to your place or your like environment, is not gonna try to trash it or is gonna respect it in a different way. You know, we're not like in a club. So that was the spirit we were trying to, you know, build with Moonshine. And now it's become more than just the event. There's also a boutique label where we release some music, and also a clothing brand attached to it. And yeah, we've been traveling with those events, doing the same in Paris and in Chile. And yeah, until we had all these big plans and COVID came in March, and this is us, you know. And even worse, there's been this outcry on the social media, and this is us again, you know. So yeah, this is pretty much what's happening here in Montreal. It's a lot of people trying to like reposition themselves and what to do next. But when it comes to what we do with like Moonshine, we just gonna continue on being creative, because that's have been the motto since the beginning. You know, just creative, find different ways to express our love for the African and diaspora's music. And you know, if it's not in the club, it's through music, it's through movies, and we can still do those things. So that's the plan, at least for now.
Thanks, Herve. I guess I'll go next.
Yeah.
So my name is Tarun, or Tarun, as it's said in Hindi. Coming to you live from the unceded First Nations territory of the Klahoose people. So I'm up on Cortez for the last few weeks, sort of hiding out in the woods. So it looks like I'm in a cardboard box, but I'm really in a little cabin studio place next to my baby, my darling.
Oh.
Modular synth. So I'm, playing around with weird bleeps and bloops at the moment. I've known, Nick, I've known you for a long time, probably a decade now or more. And Herve, I just met you, more than a decade, wow. Herve, I just met you last year in Mexico, in Guadalajara, so
but
great.
Love at first sight. Love at first sight.
Yeah, totally.
Let's just make it clear. Okay.
Let's make it clear. Yeah, we definitely spent the weekend in an intense bromance while watching the Toronto Raptors together. Although Herve was not rooting for the Toronto Raptors, make that clear.
Yes, I'm one of those.
So I'm a half South Asian kid who grew up in Montreal actually, and moved to Vancouver about 20 years ago. And I've become, I was in a band that toured for a long time. And I technically still am, but I think all of us who are in bands during COVID are sort of only half in bands. And that band is called Delhi to Dublin. And, we're not touring this summer. But I also run the largest South Asian youth event in Canada called 5X Festival that happens in Surrey and Vancouver. And I run a sort of a smaller boutique South Asian record label that's really focused on, I would say, like pushing the sound forward. So we do a lot of electronic music and, some rap and R&B and stuff. But I would say like our basis is electronic music. And I really came at this whole thing. I grew up playing Indian classical music, but I sort of fell in love with electronic music in the East Vancouver scene 20 years ago, started DJing, throwing parties, getting booked to play parties, and, that normal thing that ended up with me quitting my job and joining a band and, and doing random shit for the rest of my life.
Awesome.
And how am I doing this week?
Yeah, sorry. How are you doing?
This week,
more importantly,
has been intense. It's just like it just seems like there's so much, and it's like my heart doesn't really know what to do with it. And I know so many people from so many different communities, and it's like everyone is experiencing this in a very different way. And I wouldn't say that communities are sort of experiencing it the same way. Like there's so much diversity. And so speaking from my own community, the South Asian community, there's this half of the people who are making music, which is just like a direct appropriation of music that was, made largely unacknowledged by Black people, are just going through this as if nothing's happening. And that's been really shocking for me. And that's, both electronic music and rap music and hip hop. And a lot of pop too. I'm just watching these South Asian artists who I'm like, some of whom I'm friends with, and just kind of in this like, God, don't you understand like what's happening here? Like, how can you appropriate the culture and then not say anything? And so there's this like kind of this confusion that's happening where I feel like, I'm in some kind of a dream world. I'm like, and I can feel the kind of uncomfortableness of many of my white friends. And some of them are, some of them have been doing work for a long time with issues of race and diversity and whatnot, and they're equipped, and many others are not at all and under-resourced. And even though they're, good people, I can see them publicly sort of doing things which are like, ooh, like, yo, bro, like, what are you doing? Like, first, like, shut up. And second, so yeah, there's a lot of, it's a big week. And I think I was really feeling like I was having a hard time on Wednesday, and spoke with a friend, and she was really encouraging me, like, yes, it seems crazy and intense. And this is a global movement now, and that's a good thing. This has got so much, it's got so much kind of wings on it at the moment that we really just have to support and keep on moving forward for, positive change.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll say who. I guess I haven't said who I am either. My name is Nick. I run a record label called Westwood Recordings, manage a bunch of artists, and work closely with a huge roster of artists around the world. But it's a large focus of our artist roster and releases are artists here in Western Canada, where I live and where I started the label. And I've also, you know, still actively tour the world with my group called the Funk Hunters. And a large part of our music is, you know, built from or built upon creative work that was done by, you know, incredible Black creatives and artists way before my time, especially in my group as the Funk Hunters. And largely, you know, across the spectrum, our record label releases, you know, all styles of electronic music, but a lot of it is rooted in hip hop and funk and soul and disco and house, and or at least comes from there. So I think, you know, one thing I just want to make clear in like the three of us talking with us today is that I don't expect, you know, don't expect any one of us to speak for our community. I think we're just, you know, I really view you guys as industry leaders in your own community and movers and shakers that are intimately involved. And I really want to pick your brain and also, you know, share how I'm feeling and just see if we can, you know, start a conversation and frame the conversation more about what's happening here in our world, because I think Canada is very different than America. And so one thing, you know, that, you know, Tarun, you touched on the uncomfortableness. I think that's something that I felt this week. I felt uncomfortableness for a lot of the artists that I work with, a lot of friends, a lot of, you know, artists that we release and work with on an intimate basis, failing to like engage with what's going on. And that's really upset me, because I wondered if there was something like inherently that they were missing or that we were missing, and it really challenged me to like step up and feel like, hey, this is like my time to help you know, not to tell anyone what to do, but maybe to help them look at things differently and really start to realize, especially just like culturally, where the music that we all love and dance to at festivals all summer comes from, and why we should be more involved, and you know, what we can do better. I think that was the title of our conversation today. It was, you know, what can we do better? You know, a conversation about race in Canadian electronic music. And so in the, just speaking about the uncomfortableness for me personally, I was on social media last night and I noticed Pretty Lights, who's a, you know, one of the most famous white electronic music producers in America. He's his career has essentially been on pause. He's had a social media blackout for years now. And so he came out of the dark last night to make his first post I think it was his first post in 2 years. And he said, it's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people, but that discomfort is part of the fear that we must step into and navigate through better. And that really resonated with me as a white business owner, a white leader in my community, someone who manages artists, books talent, and chooses what records to release. I feel like it is an uncomfortable conversation because there's some facts that I'm aware of, but maybe I just don't engage with or face enough on a daily basis. And, you know, there's challenges of like how I can diversify the music and the artists that I'm working with here in Canada. And so I wanted to speak a bit about that. But before we get too deep, maybe ask you guys personally, like what relationship do you have to, you know, what relationship do you have to race in your community specifically and in the broader Canadian industry? And what experiences have you been facing, not this week, but in, you know, in the last couple of years? You guys both come from very different communities, as do I.
Well, here in Montreal, honestly, I didn't even know before that there was a music industry, because I saw like, I was looking at like whatever's happening in France, you know, just like, I have to be honest, I just didn't know it existed, okay, for like a long time, because I wasn't consuming it. And then I kind of stumbled into it while working with Pierre Quenders, who's a Congolese singer that makes him like African electronic music. So when I started working with him, so I started discovering that, yes, there's actually like an industry and there's like grants. And by the time I was getting that information, I was already 25. So my relationship, my point is just like, I feel like I was super late just knowing what was the resources around, you know? And because of that, I was already behind certain of like my peers when it comes to just knowing actually that, hey, there's Factor, there's Music Action, there's all these like resources available. You know, that's one. And you know, the most obvious one is, you know, after like just doing the the music that we were doing, I just realized that there's not that many people. It's not like really diversified, you know. And the grant was also just written in a way to push a certain like cultural man, and it was hard for people with my background and my liking to get access to those grants. So I stopped basically chasing those grants. So I guess that it's from there that yeah, I discovered the DIY, you know, just basically trying to get you know, the whole audience is basically me and my friends, and you know, the not only like the downtown kids, you know. And yeah, and from there I think we find like a pretty interesting balance between like the music industry, the grants, and also the organic way. And um the way we see it, we would like to be like 100% just like organic, you know, and just like people choose, you know, because really the grants are can be limiting when it comes to like creating. And like our scene interact a lot with what's happening internationally, and most of the time the way creation grants are written, it's mostly to just work with people that are Canadian, and just for type like dynamic. I've always felt out of it when it comes to funding and the industry, because always been like the dynamic with to export. But on the good side, I've seen a lot of like those institutions trying to reach out a bit more, other than the criteria when it comes to selections and things like that. And yeah, like for the past 2 years or so. But other than that, I'm like a bit outsider of like the music industry, and I'm always happy to meet people like Tarun. Like when I'm a bit joking at the beginning of the conversation that was love at first sight, because actually it was really like really fun to meet someone that, you know, have experience in music, been really passionate about something that is not like quote unquote mainstream, you know, and that have another identity and also come from Canada. And like, wow, these things come from Canada. That's so cool, you know. And yeah, that's my take on like the industry and, you know, the grants.
Thanks. Yeah, well, I really want to dive into grants. Before Tarun responds, Herve, I was just going to ask if you want to check if you have anything else on your computer open, because your stream was coming in great, and now we're starting to get super choppy. But if you just want to double check if you got anything else that might be using your internet. Tarun, I'll pass it over to you.
Let me close some tabs.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I'm also on spotty internet, and I just closed all of my tabs, and so hopefully, you know, hopefully I closed everything. So yeah, I feel like, and I've been really vocal about this in the past, like I'm not going to really mince words. I believe that our, you know, I mean, this country and this continent was founded on slavery and genocide. And I think that all of the institutions that we've built since have had that baked in. They've had those systems baked into them. And the music industry is, you know, the sort of capitalist, like military industrialist complex, and the music industry, that it's all part of the same way of thinking. So I think it's very possible to have like a healthy career in music. But I think that inherently, you know, if you go to any, like when I'm at Canadian Music Week or whatever, I'll speak for Canada for the time being, like any record label party you go to, it's going to be like 95% white dudes. And dudes, you know, like not a whole lot of women either. And I think we're going to get into statistics afterwards, Nick, with regards to, you know, what we've been able to dig up on in terms of, you know, what's being listened to and where the money goes. But I would say inherently my experience, like one of the things that really inspired me to do the work that I'm doing with the festival and the record label was spending 15 years in a band, playing almost 2,000 shows around the world, and coming home to North America and playing at all of these festivals with, you know, thousands and thousands of people, and looking out at the crowd and seeing the crowd and the other artists just not reflecting the diversity of the cities that we're in. And that became, it started off as like a weird observation, like, wow, like notice how there's no other brown people in the crowd. Like that's weird. You know, there's no other brown artists. That's weird. But after like show after show, year after year, it becomes like, this is like being in Get Out or something. Like, this is just fucking eerie. Like, it's eerie that you just don't, like, we have these cities that are so diverse, but that's not reflected in the festival landscape of Canada, or necessarily even the club landscape. And stuff is so divided. And in our community, in the South Asian community, people party at wedding receptions on Friday and Saturday nights in Surrey. And if you try to bring that same vibe into the city, there are a few exceptions. Like, we work closely with Blueprint and they're super open to doing stuff, but most clubs don't want a bunch of brown people in the club. That's just like straight up how it is, you know? And that comes from, you know, racist perceptions of, you know, brown people being more likely to be in gangs. And I've never been able to find any statistic that says that brown people are actually more likely to be in gangs. It's just a perception that club owners and venues have. And that, I think that really kind of trickles all the way down to, you know, artist development, because there's just not a lot of places for people to play safely. And so this entirely separate and parallel universe of like massive Indian weddings, which are basically raves with LED screens and like fucking cryo jets and, you know, every like pyrotechnics, has developed because that's where people can actually party. And, you know, and then I look at the festivals closer to home, and I'm going to, you know, I'm friends with, you know, I'm on the BC Festivals Collective, whatever. So I'm friends with a lot of people, but I think we can all take a look at the festivals happening in our own backyard and be like, wow, they're pretty fucking white. Like, unless it's like the African Festival of Vancouver, like, you know, it's like pretty white. Like you, and I think that, you know, I don't necessarily think that every person booking the stages is racist, but we're operating within a racist system. And unless we actively disrupt those systems, they'll just continue, because those are patterns that are ingrained into us. And it doesn't only go back 400 years. I mean, these are patterns that have been established in human minds for much longer than that. So I think these are really, really big problems and challenges. And I think that conversations like this are essential, and we should all be having conversations like this and within our own communities to try to like talk about what's actually there in front of us. And I think statistics help, Nick, and I know that you've been doing some work over the last few days to like actually dive into that.
Yeah, well, I mean, before I even look at statistics, I wanted to highlight a post that you actually made this week. I wrote it down. You said, just personally on one of your posts this week, Tarun, you said, our cities are so diverse. Vancouver is 51% non-white. I didn't even know what that number was. So I love this post. You went on to say, our biggest music stars are not white, and yet almost every industry event I attend is snow white and male. So, I mean, I love the tough questions. You know, are the people that are booking these things inherently racist? Are they making like racist decisions when they're booking those lineups? Or are we like, you know, I don't know what the term is, but are we passively letting a system continue? And is, I think what I'm feeling right now, like for myself personally in this moment and the feelings this week, is it's like, okay, like enough is enough. Like, I can't tell other people what to do, but I can finally step up and be like, I've been in Vancouver for 10 years. And if our city is 51% non-white, why are all the events that I'm playing and headlining all white people? I think it's such a great starting point right there. I mean, you see it as an artist on a stage. You see it when you look at the lineups. And to add on that same tip, I looked up some of the big live streaming festivals that were happening. And this journalist, Sherry, who she runs this awesome music and technology newsletter called Water and Music. I think she's actually speaking in the workshop or in the conference this weekend as well. But she did a quick study and looked at all of the big EDM festival lineup. So she included the Room Service Festival, Sirius XM's Virtual Dance Festival, the first edition of Digital Mirage. Across the board, there was only 5 to 8% Black artists. 70 to 80% of all the acts were white, and the gender split also skewed 84 to 95% male. So, I mean, those numbers are like, they're deafening. They're louder than anything else. And the thing that almost surprises me more in the current situation we're in with COVID is that if there was ever a time that it would be easier to engage other people or try out different situations in your lineup or just invite more people to the table, it would be in the live stream environment, because we're not paying for flights and hotels. We're not selling tickets in the same way. It's a totally different ballgame. And so it's interesting to see those numbers feel like, some of those numbers those are the biggest live stream festivals I would say in the electronic world right now, and some of those numbers are like more stark than I would have imagined than even a festival lineup would be.
Definitely. And I think I just want to bounce back on what Tarun said at the beginning of his analysis of what happened last week. Is I think it's just like the whole system has, like, the way it's made, when you have, let's say, most of your employees that are mostly, let's say, white Canadian, well, it's going to trickle down on the programmation. It's just like, there's no surprise. It's just like, it's going to be the way it is. And it's just like, you attract the people that you work with, and vice versa is for your product's going to have the same effect, and the surrounding and the whole dynamic. And now I also feel like some artists and institutions are basically, they're not free to actually even say what they want to say because of the crowd that they've built, and now they, like, whatever, there's some type of like guilt or whatever that comes out because of like the inaction that stayed for like this long. And now you're scared to alienate your fans for the stuff that you don't actually believe in. And I think it's the same case with Canadian institution, booking agency, records label, all that, but, people should take the time, anyone in power, like the little power that you have, to just reflect on it, on how you can actually, like, change that, if you have 5 employees and all 5 of you are 5 straight male, think about it. I know it's 5 employees, and even like the criteria why you choose people to be part of, your company, or all those things matter, I was talking about just like the information itself. It's not everyone that have the same information at the same time. When I was talking about the grants, is personally, I've never had any information about something that is free that I'm entitled to as a Canadian, and I just have like no information,
Well, let's talk about grants for a second, because you guys have both brought it up, and I think 2 immediate things to talk about. One that you touched on is information. So that's one that I think is left out of the conversation a lot. I know, like, for me, I wanted to look up the data in the grants because I wanted to bring this up, but what responsibility do these federally and provincially funded grant programs have to go out to communities that are underrepresented? That's one issue that I think needs to be addressed. But let me share with you guys quickly. I pulled up the actual factor results, and I've been a part of the factor system for a long time, helped many artists get factor grants, and I've never actually seen this data before, so it shocked me as well. But I'll just share my screen with you for a quick second. So you guys can see my screen?
Yes.
So, okay, so this is the first thing I wanted to look at. This is for the last year for factor. On the right hand side here, this is the first time I've ever actually seen the number of projects submitted for factor. So hip hop to me was really interesting. There's 522 projects submitted, so it's almost the second highest category that's submitted. But when I go and look at the genres that are approved, here's hip hop, 113 projects approved. Then when I look at the number of projects approved, the biggest leaders: folk, a predominantly white genre; alternative, a predominantly white genre; rock, which to me is already alternative, so if you combine those together, it's over 500 projects. it paints a pretty telling picture. Again, if I switch back over to the projects funded, electronic music that we're talking about, they have a couple categories, but it accounts for, around a couple hundred submitted, and we're seeing only 19 dance projects, only 67 electronic projects. So, I mean, just total base generalization here. What I'm seeing from looking at this last night and today is that the projects that are being funded, the money that's being given out, which is in the millions of dollars, you can see $2 million to alternative, $1.5 million to folk, almost 2 million to pop, 2 million to rock, is not representative of either the music that people are listening to or the music that's asking for the funding. So yeah, it's a bit shocking when you boil it down to numbers, and the numbers don't lie. Tarun, I know I'm putting you a bit on the spot here because you are involved in a bunch of these boards. You're actively, sought out to give feedback on diversity for a lot of these funding programs. And I believe you're on one of the boards for Factor. Is that right? Or can you, where's your thinking at on this?
Yeah, thanks. I am on Factor's Diversity and Inclusivity Committee. So we meet once a year. And I think I've got to say, like, as well as you, total transparency, I have greatly benefited from getting on the Factor train early in my career. And I can honestly say that without the support of, funding, there are some years where I just would have had to quit music. We definitely had our strong years, and then you have a lean year, and the funding is what was the margin. And so I think that Herve's point about like the knowledge simply does not exist. And I'll speak, for momentarily on behalf of the South Asian community, just because I work with so many young artists. It's like they don't grow up with friends who get grants. And so it's not part of the culture. It's not part of like that, like, oh yeah, I would just apply for the grant and you do this and you do that. It's like, no, you have to start from scratch. It's like I feel it when I'm working with young South Asian artists, it's like you're starting like 10 years ago. It's like they'll take, because they're 23 or 24 and they didn't at 14 or 15 or 17, they didn't know that this existed. You're starting from like zero. So you have to be like, okay, first of all, there's free money. And people like take a year to get that through their head, like that there's free money, you just got to like, and then it's like, and then this is how you do it. And this is how you build your case. And the way that we've gotten around it is building a label where we have somebody on staff who just helps people write grants. And we have he's a South Asian guy from Toronto who's great grant writer. And he's just started like bringing in the money, because these kids are often, it's like I say kids, but they're often doing millions of streams with their singles. Some of the biggest South Asian talent in the world, and it's a huge market, comes from Surrey. And yet none of these kids, still for the most part, none of these kids who are making these massive singles like get money. So speaking from the Factor side of things for a moment, they reached out, I think they realized this. Duncan is a smart guy, and the whole team there, they're smart folks. They're smart, well-meaning, and for the most part, white folks. And they're like, okay, Houston, we have a problem, which is, I think, the other possible title for this panel today. It's like, Houston, we have a problem, because we do have a problem. And I think they are trying to now actively change their policies and stuff. And so there's a bunch of us from all sorts of different communities that are on this board, but it's going to take time, man. These are systems that were built a long time ago with something very different in mind. When rock, no offense to any of these creators, like when the Bare Naked Ladies and Bryan Adams were like, the big things, it's like, that's what we did as a country. And I have the same bone to pick with the CBC. I mean, what you're doing on private radio is your business, but if you're public radio, how can you not be playing this music that's being made from our communities? Like, the CBC does not reflect what's actually happening in Canada. And they're so scared of stepping out of line that they just don't do. It's like they're just playing the same stuff. Like, sure, they'll play some, artists of color, and they have a couple of great Indigenous shows now, but like, where's the everything else? Like where's the everything else? Like, that's not my country. Like, that's not the country that I live in. So why is that? Why do I have to listen to that on the radio? Anyways, Herve, I would shoot over to you for your thoughts on this.
I think you said it all. You said it all. It's, at least we should follow like the percentage of like representation in every company, just to start off. If there's 20% of minority, we should see that in the company, and it's going to trickle down on everything else. you know, and then need to take care of those employees because people don't come from the same background. And, you know, in 2020, this, you know, we shouldn't be saying that, and people should just, once again, get informed. If you know that you're lacking sensibility towards minorities, you know, there's so many resources free out there, you know, and yeah, I think it's never too late to, you know, to realize that. And, you know, it's, you know, basic maths, you know, basic maths. And
Yeah, well,
yeah,
numbers
shouldn't be
numbers don't
afraid
lie.
to, yeah, numbers not lie. You know, the numbers are there, and I'm happy to have those numbers, you know, because sometimes, you know, we always have those conversations and the numbers are not around, and it makes it hard to, you know, to show a point, you know, and have a healthy conversation about it, you know.
Yeah. Well, when you speak about the, you know, music companies and staff, Sherry, who I pulled those EDM streaming numbers from, also ran the numbers this morning for corporate executives. So this is America, not Canada, but also very telling. She looked at the top executives for the 3 major labels in the States. I mean, there's only 3 left. That's, you know, there's an issue in itself, but Universal, Warner, and Sony. And she also added in Live Nation and AEG, so the 2 biggest concert promoters in America. And she looked at just the board members and corporate executives. 8% were Black. Then she expanded that number and added like another 120 lower level executives, so presidents, vice presidents, and 92 of them are white, 22, so 18% were Black. So you're seeing, if we're talking about like this trickle down leadership, you know, from the top down, 8% to 18% were Black. I don't know, she didn't have any stats of if there were other peoples of color and what the female or male, you know, what the gender skew would be on those. I'm sure we could take an educated guess, but yeah, I mean, Tarun, you mentioned that earlier too, just when we were talking about this, about funding, the idea of like, do these bodies have a responsibility to speak to the representation of the country and reach out to those people, but how much of it is happening internally inside of these companies? Like, when, you know, we all interface a lot with management companies, agents, various funding bodies, this, you know, not specific to Factor, but what does the staff look like at these places, and how do we change that? Because I think that trickle down thing is silently is like a large part of it. I mean, it's really perpetuating a system that's been in place for a long time. And it takes, you know, when someone like you is called upon to speak for a different group of people in a community, it shines a spotlight on that. But if companies aren't engaging with those people, like, should, you know, I'll just throw a hard question out there. Should they be mandated? Like, if you're receiving federal, you know, tens of millions of dollars of federal funding, should there be a mandate that there's some kind of diversity clause in the money that you're giving out?
Herve, what do you think about that, brother?
Yeah, I think definitely there should be a clause like that. You know, like
Why
for the
not,
couple,
right?
yeah, why not? You know, if that's what it takes for people to have like a reminder, if that's the friendly reminder that people need, you know, because they're handling this money, because, you know, yeah, why not? You know, just like a quick anecdote, like I've put out an album with this artist that I've mentioned, New Pierre Quanders, and throughout his career, we've never worked with any publicist that wasn't white. And his music is singing like Congolese, rumba, influence with some electronic music in Lingala. So like people, they don't understand it, you know? So it was really hard, you know, to have like someone like him to market his music and have like a whole team of people and market it in Canada. And then came this publicist from Cameroon, you know, in the loop. And just because she could understand where's like the music was coming from and articulate it like properly and communicate that message to Canadian media and professionals, you know, I think she was so crucial, because that album had reviews from like Pitchfork and such, and a work that was never done before. And to me, that was like a direct input of someone that was like from a minority that made that project to achieve that level of excellence, you know. And that cannot happen if you don't make like minority involved in your projects, you know, because you're spending all those money, but then you finance artists, and then the artists can't even communicate properly with the audience because you don't have enough people from the community that are professionals and such, you know. So yeah, that's like my little anecdote about like, yes, maybe we should have like that 20%, if that's 20% of minority that is in Canada, you know, we should see it, you know, with your releases, with your staff, and, you know, yeah, why not? Why not?
Well, I love that anecdote. I mean, Tarun, you spent the last 10 years touring the world and making albums in a very, I mean, I shouldn't say the entire group is South Asian. You know, there was multiple cultures, kind of like a melting pot mixed together in your band, Delhi to Dublin. But I, you know, would be willing to bet that 99% of the team that you guys had access to was probably white. I mean, white publicists, white agents, white managers. Can you speak to, you know, what that experience was like? And do you think your band would have had different successes if you had someone from your community representing the band in certain situations?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we made a conscious decision because there's a very healthy South Asian music scene, even in Canada. Like if you want to, you know, be a successful South Asian singer, you can definitely grow up in Canada and have a whole career where there's no integration with you're never going to get played on the radio. You're never going to do a show at the Commodore, but you can make a living within that community because it's a big community. But we made a decision really early on that that's not how we wanted to do it. It was like, I don't want to just exist in this like desi world of music. I want to be doing, like, we want to play the Commodore. We want to go play the Fillmore in San Francisco. We want to play Burning Man. We want to do all of these things. Like that's where my background was. I was like, I'm not interested in just being pigeonholed. So we made a conscious decision to hire white people because we knew that the brown people would have no, you know, and you know this very well, and Herve, I'm sure you do too. It's like the music industry is like every other industry. It's who you know. And the people you want on your team are the people who know people, because nothing happens. It's like, you know, when you go to a festival and it's like, submit your music here. Like, I don't know if any of those emails even go anywhere. Like, I don't even think that's a thing.
Yeah.
Like, I've never heard of anyone actually getting into a festival by like submitting on a form. It's like, who do you know? Do you know the person that books the festival? And, you know, I just went through this, Nick, with the Minecraft thing that we're both working on at the moment. I'm going after these big acts, and it's like, you can go through official channels, but that's pretty much useless. You need to know the person who knows the person. And it's the white people in Canada, you know, that know the people. And so we were like, well, we want to do this, so we need to use the white people to get there. And just going back to your earlier, you know, comment on responsibility, I 100% believe that if this is free money given by the population of Canada, given by taxpayers, then these companies that are taking the free money have to be accountable to that money. And that goes for the CBC and it goes for all of the labels. I know that not all of Factor's money is public money, but half of it is. And, you know, all of the companies taking this free money disproportionately in terms of genre have to be accountable in some way, shape, or form to the communities that they're living in. And I think that, you know, just even necessitating a policy is a very reasonable thing to do. If you're private, if you're Live Nation or AEG, do what you like, but I mean, try to be a good person, you know, like realize what you're doing. And, you know, there's a whole model for corporate responsibility and B Corp, which I think would be a great idea for everyone to do. But if you're publicly funded, you better be doing this stuff. Otherwise, like, your time is going to come.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it comes down to, like, I just go back to the comment you made about Vancouver being 51% non-white. And so if you're in the, you know, to remove the funded government things out of this, because, you know, I don't want us to only focus on grant programs. And of course there's, you know, we've said it, but I'll just acknowledge it too. My own career, my own businesses, we've benefited so much from those grant programs. But to move the conversation to the other side, that a lot of the sphere that we all work in is the private industry, and it's all for profit. And at the end of the day, we're trying to make money for our artists. AEG and Live Nation is trying to make money for their festivals. And if they're not making money, if they're not selling tickets, then none of it exists to begin with. So, but if Vancouver's 51% non-white, then aside from the talent lineup that you're seeing on like these events, like why don't I don't know a single Indigenous or First Nations agent in Canada. Personally, I'm not saying they don't exist. I've never been involved in a meeting or a conversation with, you know, of stakeholders. There's, you know, they exist with different groups and collectives and representing DJs, but in terms of like at a physical like name, logo, branded like agency in Canada, there's so many Indigenous people, tons of up and coming Indigenous artists, but no Indigenous agent. And so I wonder, is it which path, or is it a bit of both? Like, is it that white agents could represent more Indigenous acts and white publicists can take on more of those acts? Because I do think the anecdote survey that you offered is really telling. Like having someone that didn't understand the culture, that didn't understand the music, then representing the music also seemed problematic for you. So, you know, how do we make that shift that people see people that look like them representing them? Because I think, you know, as much as Tarun, you're saying by you tapping into white people that were connected and they held that power, it helped you. But if we don't start to have people feel like they're represented by the people that look like them, that understand them, that understand their music, then how will we ever see anything change?
I'd say that once again, I think the message doesn't go like, let's say, to the kid that's growing up in Cartierville in Montreal or Montreal North. They don't know that. They don't, you know, the spectrum of like the work that can be done in the music industry. A lot of people, especially when you're young, you only see being on front of the stage. And going back home, I'm going to speak for myself, parents, they don't really know like the different jobs that you can do, and you can actually have like a career being an agent and do all the different things, you know? So once again, for me, that's like the information part of things, you know, the education in school, like when you go see like the counselor, you know, I want to do music. Let's just tell the kid like, well, there's no chance of you going on stage. You can be like, okay, there's also a technician, you can do this and that and this and that, you know, like all those different options. Growing up, I haven't heard a lot of them, you know. I have to, like, it's like getting a bit older that I discovered that there's like so many things you can do in music other than being on stage. Again, the information, you know, and if there's not that many, and I haven't crossed the path of a lot of like African Canadian managers of industry people, but I think that if they had like that information a bit early on and access to certain resources, you know, from the industry, yes, we'll see more of them, you know. And I think I saw this program from Factor. There's this, I think they have like a community agent, something, you know, someone that is always like doing a lot of reaching out. And I think SoCan also did that not so long ago here in Montreal, where they had this like freshly immigrated in Canada, Martinique, someone from Martinique that was doing some reaching out to people from like Cartierville and such. And it brought a lot of colors, you know. You saw that, you know, those kids really early on, they could start like building tours, having agents, just because now, you know, someone reached out to them, showed them that there's a circuit of professional and such. And that's, you know, and like kudos to like, I don't have their name, you know, kudos to like those positions, but you should just have more of them, because I'd be surprised that like, let's say you can only have one or two community agents like that in Canada. You know, it should be like throughout, you know, the country, you know, more of those reach out, you know, yeah. And then for like you were talking about like a privately owned company, well, privately owned company, I'm a strong believer that you need to align with the society that you live in. If you do that properly, you're always going to benefit, you know, always, you know. There's no way that like people won't embark in your trip. Also something that I saw in the electronic scene community here in Montreal, certain promoters that were more like community driven, basically stating that no one will stay outside of their venue if they don't have funds to get in. You know, just like simple things like that. You know, helps. You know, bring diversity to a venue. You know, it's not everyone. Like $10 is not $10 for everyone, because yes, it's $10, but it's also like the cab to go to the venue, to go back home, and this and that. And just having if you can't get to this concert, just send us an email, we'll figure that out, or whatever. Those type of initiative, I think overall helps like bringing diversity. I've seen it in my own events where it's really like a melting pot. Like that's the Montreal that I know. You'll see queer people, Black people, people dancing on stage and all that, just because we had like a really open policy about first the guest list, who's the first people that should get at the venue, you know? Like we really open with our social media. People ask us like to get in for free, whatever, you know, because they're already participating. That's the way we see it. Like they're already participating in the show that we're giving to the people. So if you're queer, Black, femme getting at the party and you don't have the money to get in, you're already part of that culture. You shouldn't pay to get in, you know? That's the way we think. We should pay you to be part of this thing, you know? So if someone like us asks for a guest list, obviously you're getting in, you know? We can't say no to that, you know? So that's like, I think overall, being sensible, like a bit sensitive to like the social climate that you live in, personally, I think it always gets you business even in a better position.
Tarun, do you have thoughts to add?
Yeah. Thank you, Herve. That was so good. You know what? I still haven't been to one of your events. I tried to time it last summer, and now
we're coming in Vancouver. You know, trying to find the right person.
Yeah. I wanted to first start off by saying, like, so Nick, just in case there's any folks who are watching that are curious, I can provide some resources as to, like, you know, First Nations agents and, you know, managers, because there's definitely a lot of activity happening, and happy to share those resources.
Yeah, and I guess to not just to clarify my point, and it was not to single out, you know, any one community of people, but I definitely would say from my own relationship with the industry that I struggle to name people of color that are in not working independently, but that are at the main agencies and the main management companies in Canada. And I find that troubling, you know, as a label owner. I mean, it's, you know, it's something that we discuss on a regular basis. And anyways, that was my point. And so I you know, if there is, do you know of is there a First Nations or Black agents at any of the top, you know, 2 or 3 major Canadian agencies?
I don't know about the agencies, but there's definitely folks who are doing that work, who like Suzette Amaya is a great example. I know Jarrett, who was, you know, might have been on this call with us today, Jarrett Martineau. Alan Grey Eyes, those folks have been doing that kind of work for a long time, but I don't believe that they're at the main ones. Anyways, we could do some research and figure that out. On the side of like corporate responsibility, I never think that I think that like the B Corp argument is a good one, and I believe in that, but I don't think you can necessarily bring that to Live Nation. I think money does talk, and I think that organizations like, so there's 2 great examples, best practices maybe. I think of Blueprint. They are so diverse, and I work with those guys a lot. They're the only like sort of larger promotions company in Vancouver that just has an open door with us, where we go in and pitch them crazy ideas, and they're like basically yes to everything. And I think that that's in a large part just because you look at who works there. You go to their offices, and it's like all people of color. It's so diverse, and that really does trickle down into the events that they're willing to support. When you go to Fortune on a Friday or a Saturday, like you might see 3 or 4 white people in there, but it's all Asian kids. And I think Blueprint can do that because they're really connected, like in a real way. It's not like, oh, I'm some dude who's connected to the Asian community. It's like, no, there's Asian people working there who are connected to their own communities, so they can open the door and like create these freaking amazing nights, which are like totally, you know, they're fire. And so I think that there's that example. There's also the example of the Remix project in Toronto, of like, you know, something that's created, something that's created so much like financially viable music And it's like really in the community and doing work and free if you don't have financial means. And so there's two examples there, and I'm sure they all have their problems and whatever, but there's two examples of folks who are doing really impactful work. And it's really, very sort of very diverse organizations, and they're being successful. So there's not really like that argument, when you talk to the like BC festival that has no people of color in the organization, on the lineup, in the crowd, and they're like, well, that's just not what, we don't like, we try, like we put up posters.
we put up posters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we put up posters in the Indian restaurant, and they just, I don't know, like they just didn't come. I think it's like because this thing is so systemic, you have to do more than just put up the poster in the Indian restaurant or at like the, like Cameroonian community center. Like these things have to be actively disrupted. And if you're looking around at your organization and you're like, wow, like, okay, everyone is white, everything that we're doing is white, and that's not what Canada looks like. I think it's kind of like if you have that revelation, it's like it's time to start doing work, and it's not time to phone up the one Black person that you're friends with on Instagram and ask them what you should do. It's time to like actually do the work of like Googling resources and do your homework and just be a fucking human being in 2020. Like wake up.
Yeah, definitely.
Are there other like best practices or examples that come out to mind for you?
I would like to tip my hat to like the Boiler Room, Blaze. I don't know if you guys are friends with him. I liked his approach, and just when, because I don't think anyone wakes up and thinking that whatever he's doing is not doing right, But then even though he had this revelation that I'm not doing something right, he guessed it again, he second guessed it again, and I guess it's gonna get there at some point. But I think it's a nice example, at least for now, of so I'm curious to see how Boiler Room gonna change that, because I think, speaking of electronics music, it's a big platform, and I'd just like to see here in Montreal, in terms of like best practices.
Herve, could you just before you move past that, could you just explain, just for people that might not know, like what it is about Boiler Room and what they're doing right, like why it came to mind for you?
Well, Boiler Room, because I'm following Blaze, the founder of Boiler Room on Instagram, and a week ago when the Black Lives Matter movement got louder than usually, he made this post about how dangerous it's to just read the headlines, and how is basically committing to making change in his own practices, And then yesterday he reviewed.
Oh, I think we lost you.
And that was good. I was like hanging on his every word.
I know. He's still give him a second. No. He's still connected. I'm gonna hit, I hit pause, and this will.
Yeah, so about Blaze, so a week ago he made a post about how it was dangerous to read, like as a white person, to only read the headlines about the protest and not actually knowing what's the goal behind it and what's the ramification, And even though personally feels like he's doing everything, in his company, in his power to fix the situation, he was content with what so far if done as a change to his company. And then yesterday he revised that post, where he actually realized that he is part of the problem for not having any minority back on his board, for not having no trans people in his board. And especially in his position of electronic, and we're speaking about techno, house, and we're not going to start naming everything, and not having that sensibility in like key strategic position in his company will definitely impact uh, his baby is like his boiler room, you know. And I liked his thought process. I like that someone like him that is, I think, close to like this like internet culture can, you know, have that thought process, you know. I'm really curious. I've bumped into him, you know. I've heard some stuff about Boiler Room, not always the nicest one, you know, and everybody's tired of like the chat room of Boiler Room, you know. But having him, you know, acknowledge and be so close to, I think, what he thought is community was, you know, I was really hopeful, you know. And I'm hoping that, you know, organizations like that, because yes, they're based off internet, they feel that, you know, organizations like that are, for me, like at the core of like the culture that we consume, can have thought process in that direction. I'm really hopeful, you know.
Yeah, well, I think there's lots to be hopeful about as well. And I think that, you know, this week has just been such a roller coaster of emotions for everybody for totally different reasons. And our relationship to issues unfolding are very unique to who we are and where we come from and what community we work with. So I think like just having this conversation, and like I really thank you guys for joining me so last minute. I think just beginning to have these conversations, at least for me, is like very cathartic, and it helps me think through things more. Hearing more viewpoints helps. And I think like, you know, it's crazy how fast time flies. We could keep talking about this for another couple hours, I feel like, but I maybe just to end on like, you know,
or like 400 years.
Yeah, easy.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, but just to end on that positivity, I think, you know, I love to look at numbers and focus on the micro, and just to back up a little bit and just to speak to like the human element of what's going on. For me, I feel like there's a momentum that's happening right now that I haven't felt before, and I've felt glimmers of it in other fights and other causes, but there's a momentum that's like swept through the States right now that is really exciting. And it's a chance for maybe for some people that wanted to have a catalyst to do something different. And so I was just wondering if you guys could reflect on that. Like, what do you hope to come out of the conversations that are like this, that are happening this week? And what positivity or hopefulness, if any, are you getting out of current events unfolding?
Yeah, maybe I'll let you go first, brother. Oh, is he frozen again? Herve, tu es là?
Might have lost him.
Yeah, I'm trying to like.
Non, ça marche maintenant. Ça marche.
Ça marche maintenant?
Ouais.
Ah, attends. Je vais essayer de rentrer à l'intérieur, changer de. If that's better. Is this better?
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you hear the question of it?
Yeah, le mot de la fin.
Ouais. Alors.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Ben.
Well, I wanted to let you go first, and
okay.
Yeah.
What do I hope? I hope that in all of this, we can somehow we can just, especially like the younger generation, we can somehow learn to keep our hearts open and stay connected, and really, you know, sometimes I feel like there's this thing that happens where we get so caught up in the kind of, especially amongst you know, like non-Black communities, let's say, for the time being, we get all caught up in the like guilt and shame, like this is wrong, and we start this self-hatred cycle, which just kind of like propagates the whole thing. And I think that's a part of this destructive cycle of, like, you know, genocide and slavery, which is you know, started so long ago and it's kind of built into our DNA. And so I hope for folks who are not, you know, who are not Black and are not Indigenous right now, and I'm counting myself as a white passing, you know, half South Asian dude, that we can do the hard work inside of ourselves, to actually, because the progress is not going to happen by us signing petitions and putting black squares up on our Instagram page. Like, the progress only comes from an introspection of those patterns which are born into us. And that comes from self-acceptance and self-love. Like, this is a joyful revolution, in the words of Angela Davis, I believe. This is not something that has to be driven by guilt and shame. This is something that's about opening and about allowing and about healing. And I'm not saying that this doesn't require revolution, because it does, but I am saying that I feel like there's a path forward. You know, maybe there's a need for righteous rage, and there's a need for all of that, but I'm only speaking, you know, now I'm speaking like as a non-Black person. There's also a need to do that hard interior work, and that's the stuff that will actually, you know, I believe, help make a real change that will last beyond just the next news cycle.
I love that term. What did you say? It's a joyful revolution?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's why I wanted to just to end on a positive note, because I do feel a lot of positivity, and maybe it's weird to say that while there's, you know, people that we know that are literally on the streets right now, potentially being shot at with rubber bullets, maybe arrested. I mean, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of turmoil, but at the same time, like, I see the same infinite amounts of positivity, and I see people coming together. I see people asking questions they've never asked before. I see like internal dialogue in my own head that I know I should have more, but I don't, or it's easy not to. You know, I think the easy path is maybe what is like being illuminated is not the best path. And I think the positive outcome of that is that, like, harder conversations, harder work done by people like me will lead to like so many more fruitful opportunities. Like, there's like music and genres and artists that I haven't discovered and I'm not working with, and that's super exciting to me. And I think to me, that's like a positive outcome out of feelings that I'm, you know, and emotions that I'm having this week. Is just like, there's so much opportunity that is being undiscovered, that's not cultivated, that doesn't have a light shined on it in the way it should. And I think we're all richer for having more of it. So that's like some positivity that I've been feeling. Herve, I'll let you end it with any feelings or sentiments that you might have as well.
You know, just hoping that, you know, as a Canadian, we don't see this as something that, you know, we don't experience here, you know, not to be taken lightly. You know, I've seen a couple of, like, you know, festival taking the easiest way out, you know, with the square, you know, and like for corporation, for public funding, that's like not the way to go. But on the human side, on the friend side, industry side, I've never seen this much like conversation, just like about like the why we're doing this actually, you know, and why did I miss this? How could I have missed this? You know, those questions are really, you know, it's the first thing, you know, and having that first step is really, you know, I'm really hopeful for that. Seeing some friends in position of power, or whatever it is, you know, from like 1 employee to like 100 employees, thinking about making some change, and some actually making the change. You know, that's you know, that's not something to be taken lightly. You know, and you know, all this work on the social media that might have seemed like really like childish, like you see that, you know, it's an important tool, like a really important tool, you know, and yeah, you know, just hopeful, you know, hopeful. Yeah.
Great. Tarun, do you have any last words you want to add? I just want to thank you guys for sharing your wisdom and your experiences and compassion and having this conversation with me today. And I hope that we can do it again soon. And thanks to AIMCon and the Electronic Music Conference for giving us a platform to talk about it today. And I wish you guys a great weekend. Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys. Hope to see you
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye.
Okay.